Hello Donna Downey fans, it's Fiona Paltridge here with you again for another Artist Gang Tuesday, and this week I've decided that I'm going to try and put together a little watercolour painting. So I've got a piece of A4 watercolour paper here. I think it's around about 300 GSM. It's nothing terribly expensive. It's just off of a pad of watercolour paper that I've got, and I'm preparing it with some tape. I've taped it down for two reasons. One, to keep it nice and flat, but two, to also give it a nice little white border when I'm finished. Now I'm doing a wet on wet watercolor technique here, where I've wet my background paper with water first, and then I'm going to add my watercolor over the top. I'm using some Daniel Smith watercolor paints here, and this color is the Lapis Lazuli Genuine for the sky. And you can see that because my paper is wet behind and I'm adding wet paint onto it, you're getting a blooming effect. So that's really great for little bits of clouds and bits and pieces. However, it's watercolor paint, so it'll do whatever it really wants to. I can't control it that much. For the color underneath, I'm doing an Amazonite Genuine. I think I got it right that time. And I'm just letting these two colours wash together a little bit. Now off camera, because I forgot to push the button, you didn't actually see me roll my paper towel over the top to make it nice and smooth and soft looking. It's partially dry now, so I tape it back down again. And the reason I'm doing this is because I want to stretch the water paper out once more before I start putting my main design on top. Today I'm using one of Donna's stencils, and it's called Lilac Buds. It's just beautiful, and with a sponge that's still got a little bit of leftover Payne's grey paint in it from a previous project, I'm just very, very lightly dabbing through the stencil. And when I lift it up, you can see it sort of gives me a bit of a watercolour effect, even though I didn't actually use any watercolours. And with my brush, a little bit more of the leftover Payne's grey and some of the Daniel Smith watercolours, I'm just adding a little hill for my trees to sit on. I just love the way that these watercolours blend in with each other, and it's actually done quite well blending in with that little bit of Payne's grey as well. Now I wanted to thicken up my little forest a little bit, so even though these are lilac buds, I've actually used them as forest trees in a watercolour scene. And I'm adding some Shadow Violet watercolour just to create a bit more thickness in amongst the trees. They're simply just lines with some little spots. That's all they are. It's quite abstract because I really can't draw anything for the life of me. But I can make things kind of look like what they're meant to look like. I wanted to put one here over the top of the trees. I don't want to just fill the holes in the middle. I actually want to make a foreground and a background. And you can see how it's starting to develop now with these little lines and these tiny little spots. I'm not wiping away any of the watercolours. I'm just letting them sit on, this is a wet on dry technique because the background is fairly dry. And I'm just letting them sit there and do their own thing. So they're just soaking in to the watercolour paper at their own pace. They're still quite wet. And later on I'll come in with some paper towel and I'll show a really, really cool technique. What I love the most about watercolours is that they are so interactive with each other. So I've got some watercolour on the background, and then I've added some additional watercolour over the top, and what happens is that they interact with each other, if that makes sense. So when I put these little spots of watercolour over the top, they're actually reacting with the watercolour underneath, so that when I come along with my paper towel and roll it over the top, it actually removes, yes, it removes the colour that I've just put on top, but it also removes a little bit of the colour that's sitting underneath, and it gives this beautiful shadowy ring effect where the little flowers are going to be sitting. At the moment I haven't added any colour, but I will add some little bit of quinacridone rose and some transparent pyro orange as well. So there we go, rolling it, and what I'll do is I'll just zoom in so you can see what I'm talking about. You see these little dark circles around the outside of those little leaves, and they've got that tiny, tiny little bit of green in them where I've put in the Amazonite Genuine. Now I'm going to add that Quin Rose, and then I'll also add some transparent Pyrrole Orange, and I'll do the same thing again, where I'll just let it sit for a little while. And with these ones I hit them with a heat gun very quickly as well, because then that also darkens the circle. around the outside because that area dries and the middle of it still stays quite wet. So when you lift the excess paint off, you get this little round circle. It's a really, really cool technique that you can do with watercolors. And because it, like I said, because it actually activates the paint underneath, you get like a layered effect with your colors. I just zoom in here a little bit so you can see up really close what I mean. So there's some wet paint on there. I hit it a little bit with a heat gun and then I roll some paper towel over the top, and you can see how it just gives this nice subtle addition of colour. Now, to finish this little piece off, what I wanted to do is I wanted to make sure that these little lilac bud trees stood out because the watercolours are quite soft. So I wanted to put some contrast in here. So I chose to do this by actually tracing around the inside of the stencil. I'm just using a uni pin fine liner. I think it's a number 2 or something, because I didn't want it to be too thick. And the magic of video, we've pretty much finished. It took me about 10 minutes, I think, to go through this, and I did get quicker at it as I went. But when I pulled it off, I was really impressed with the final result because you could see these gorgeous trees, just really, really quite striking. And then I can take off my tape from around the outside and it's ready to be framed. So there you go, one little abstract watercolour forest. See you next time.